They're swiping at the big dogs now. Looking at this in terms of war, it's a frontline assault. The mainstream wants to wrestle control of the narrative back, and they've lost it. The symbol of that loss happens to be another guy named Joe. Who knew a Joe could cause so much disruption? And what happened to me with the LA Times is happening to him now with Rolling Stone. But I was a much easier target because I don't have nearly the following, so the LA Times could misrepresent me rather easily. The world was much less open to any form of debate on this than they are now. So in that way, I was also vulnerable. And plus, I hadn't developed my communication style to where it's at now. Not saying it's great now, not bragging on it now, but I'm just saying I had those factors working against me. And as my defamation attorney says, they cut you deep. They got the dark blood. They went after people I knew to rope them into talking shite, and some were dumb enough to fall for it. Some thought it would be a good idea to paint themselves as Benedict Arnolds in the Sunday LA Times art section. Some thought that would be a good look. Laughing my ass off for real, brother. But let's get to the other Joe. I only bring up my relationship to this whole thing as an interesting comparison to see how the same playbook is being used on people who are on different levels. And it is the same playbook. You take nuggets of what has been said and then inflate the areas where one has misspoken, and we all misspeak, especially talking about complicated matters under the weight of high emotion in an atmosphere of intense fear and censorship. It's easy to take someone out of context who's trying to communicate in a free and easy manner and who are being brave enough and bold enough to do that. It's not difficult to hang anyone out to dry, so to speak, particularly when the audience who is consuming the smear really wants the structure of their own indoctrination to stand. I mean, you're human. It's human nature to want to be right, especially when you are invested to the point of taking experimental injections and losing friends and family as a result of your conviction to pledging allegiance to folks like Bill G, Fauci, Big Pharma, the government, the New World Order, whatever you want to call it, control and fear, and limiting all the ones who think that they can just be free. Here come the dogs. I haven't read the piece in Rolling Stone, but the headline is enough. You get the gist. And then the blue check marks go on writing damning tweets, and the soft-headed smear campaigns swarm in. It becomes a pile-on of social shame. A kid being bullied on the playground, so to speak. But the interesting thing now is they are going for a juggernaut. Joe is bigger than they are. So the fact that they're attempting to gaslight the few that don't listen to him and the many that do shows a lot about where we are as a society. It shows a lot as to the level of indoctrination the powers that be reckon they have. The gloves are coming off. It's a world full of dogs out here. I wonder what Russell Brand thinks of all this, because Joe was an expert at diplomacy, and that's another difference between me and him. I'm not so great with diplomacy. The dogs will tell you that. It's an area of work for me, you could say. But Joe was the king of diplomacy. Before this, the biggest smear on Joe was that he was a fence sitter. Thank God the dogs are behind the fence, which was partially true, but he was smart to align himself as best he could with all sides. I'm sure that the ability had a lot to do with his popularity. He was the king of diplomacy until Russell Brand came into town, came into his own. Russell could write a book on it. And the fact that he manages to speak to and for both sides of this equation is nothing short of miraculous. But, and here's a giant but, a line in the sand is being drawn here, and his ability to remain diplomatic will be cut open and bled out just like Joe's is being now. There comes a time in all these situations where you have to pick a side, or one will be picked for you. Once a giant smear/campaign is being waged on you, your side has been chosen for you. But that doesn't usually happen unless you've made yourself pretty darn clear as to what you really think. Now, Russell is a wordsmith of diplomacy to a gold medal Olympic standard. But what we all know what he really thinks. We all know what he really thinks. He's for liberty. He's for freedom. He's for the same thing a couple of Joes and the most of the rest of us are for. It's the same message dressed up in different packages, to delivery systems, different outfits, different tactics to get the message through. Question what they've been telling you and don't give away your rights. And there is something going on here that is obviously not just about a virus. That's the message in a nutshell. That, and don't let them take your voice. That's the message. That's the dangerous message. That's the message that you're not allowed to deliver. And if you deliver it long enough, they will find a way to smear you into oblivion or try. And that's why I'm curious what Russell thinks, because he's a smart guy and he has to know that his run of diplomatic immunity is nearing the finish line, just as Joe's just did, just as Brett Weinstein's did some months before, just as mine did before I even got out the gate, laughing my ass off. I think that's why I suck at diplomacy. Because when the thing we were trying to be diplomatic with happens to be tyranny, I think I know at an instinctual level where all this is going anyway. So let's rip the Band-Aid off. But the real interesting part of this is society will decide, not the media juggernauts. Their interest isn't with the minds of Joe Rogan and Russell Brand. Their interest is in the minds of you. The real battle is your voice and ability to use it. Will you stay silent as they take your freedoms away? Will you cower in fear? Or will you speak up and take a bit of the tar and feathers of social shame? Because that's the whole deal. Take a minute to think about it though, because freedoms surrendered are never freely returned. And that goes double for your voice. Right now you still have a choice. It's not hard to see a world where you no longer even have that. Good morning.